Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is called the Dragon of the North. It's a myth from northern lands. Very long ago, there lived a terrible dragon who came out of the north and laid waste whole tracts of country, devouring both men and beasts. This dragon had a body like an ox, and legs like a frog, 2 short forelegs, 2 long back ones, and besides that, it had a tail like a serpent. When it moved, it jumped like a frog, and with every spring it covered 1/2 mile of ground. Nothing could hunt it, because its whole body was covered with scales, which were harder than stone or metal. Its 2 great eyes shone by night, and even by the day. The brightest lamps, that's just what they were like. And pity anyone who looked into those eyes. That ill look would make them become bewitched, and was obliged to rush off his own accord into the dragon's jaws. In this way, the dragon was able to feed upon both men and beasts without the least trouble itself, as it needed not to move from the spot where it was lying. Its habit was to remain for several years in the same place, and it would not move on till the whole neighbourhood was eaten. All the neighbouring kings had offered rich rewards to anyone who should be able to destroy the dragon, either by force or enchantment. Many had tried their luck, but all failed miserably. However, there was a saying that the dragon might be overcome by one who possessed King Solomon's signet ring, upon which a secret writing was engraved. The inscription would enable anyone who was wise enough to interpret it to find out how the dragon could be destroyed. Only no one knew where the ring was hidden. At last, a young man with a good heart and plenty of courage set out to search for the ring. He took his way towards the sunrise, because he knew that all the wisdom of old time comes from the east. After some years he met with a famous Eastern magician and asked for his advice on the matter. The magician answered, "Mortal men have but little wisdom and can give you no help. The birds of the air would be better guides to you if you could learn their language. I can help you to understand if you will stay with me a few days." The youth thankfully accepted the magician's offer, and each day for 3 days he drank 9 spoonfuls of a powerful potion, which made him able to understand the language of birds. From then on, the youth never felt lonely. As he walked along, he always had company, because he understood the language of the birds. And in this way, he learned many things which mere human knowledge could never have taught him. One afternoon, when he had just sat down under a tree in the forest to eat his lunch, he heard 2 gaily plumaged birds discussing how he could only find King Solomon's lost ring if he sought help from the witch maiden, who at dusk would wash her face in a magic spring to stay ever young and beautiful. The birds were going to watch, so the youth immediately resolved to follow the birds to the spring. When the birds flew away, the young man's heart beat with anxiety, lest he should lose sight of his guides. But by running as hard as he could, he managed to keep them in view, until they again perched upon a tree. The young man ran after them until he was quite exhausted and out of breath, and after 3 short rests, the birds at length reached a small open space in the forest, on the edge of which they perched in a very high tree. When the youth had overtaken the birds, he saw that there was a clear spring in the middle of the space. He hid himself at the foot of the tree and he waited. When the evening light had quite faded, and the full moon was shining down upon the forest, there came out of the wood a maiden, gliding over the grass so lightly that her feet seemed scarcely to touch the ground. The youth had never seen in his life such a woman so beautiful. She went to the spring and looked up to the full moon, then knelt down and bathed her face 9 times, then looked up at the moon again and walked 9 times around the well, singing. Then she dried her face with her long hair and was about to go away when her eyes suddenly fell upon the spot where the young man was hiding. The youth knew he had been discovered and rose, saying, "Forgive me, beautiful maiden, if I have offended by watching you." The maiden answered kindly, "Come and spend this night in my house. You will sleep better on the pillow than a damp moss." The youth hesitated, but he heard the bird saying at the top of the tree, "Go where she calls you, but take care to give no blood, or you will sell your soul." So the youth went with her, and soon they reached a beautiful garden, where stood a splendid house. It glittered in the moonlight. It was almost like it was built out of the finest of gold and silver. When the youth entered, he found many splendid chambers, each one finer than the last. Hundreds of candles burned upon golden candlesticks and shed a light like the brightest day. At length they reached a chamber where a table was spread with the most costly dishes. At the table were placed 2 chairs, one of silver, the other of gold. The maiden seated herself upon the golden chair and offered the silver one to her companion. They were served by maidens dressed in white, whose feet made no sound as they moved about, and not a word was spoken during the meal. Afterwards, the youth and the witch maiden talked pleasantly together until a woman, dressed in red, came in to remind them that it was bedtime. The youth was now shown into another room, containing a silken bed with down cushions, where he slept delightfully. Yet he seemed to hear a voice near his bed which repeated to him, "Remember to give no blood." The next morning, the maiden asked him whether he would like to marry her and stay with her always in this wonderful place. The youth was tempted, but he remembered how the birds had called her a witch, and their warning always sounded in his ears. Therefore he answered very cautiously and asked for some days to consider the matter. The maiden agreed, and to make the time pass pleasantly, she took the youth over every part of her beautiful dwelling and showed him all her splendid treasures. One day the maiden took him into a secret chamber where a little gold box was standing on a silver table. Pointing at the box, she said, "Here is my greatest treasure. This is the best in the whole wide world. There is not another like it. It is a precious gold ring. When you marry me, I will give this ring as a marriage gift, and it will make you the happiest of mortal men. But in order that our love may last forever, you must give me for the ring 3 drops of blood. Just 3 drops from the little finger of your left hand." When the youth heard these words come out of her mouth, a cold shudder ran all over him, for he remembered that his soul was at stake. He was cunning enough, however, to conceal the scared shudders through his body, making no direct answers and showing nothing. But he only asked the maiden, as if carelessly, what was so remarkable about that ring. She answered, "No mortal is able entirely to understand the power of this ring, but no one thoroughly understands the secret signs engraved upon it. But even with my half knowledge, I can work great wonders. If I put the ring upon the little finger on my left hand, then I can fly like a bird through the air, wherever I wish to go. If I put it on my forefinger of my left hand, I am invisible, and I can see everything that passes around me, though no one can see me. If I put the ring upon the middle finger of my left hand, then neither fire nor water, no sharp weapon can hurt me. If I put it on the forefinger of my left hand, then I can produce whatever I wish. I can, in a single moment, build houses or anything I desire. Finally, as long as I wear the ring on the thumb of my left hand, that hand is strong and it can break down rocks and walls. Besides these, the ring has other secret signs, which, as I said, no one can understand. No doubt it contains the secrets of great importance. The ring formerly belonged to King Solomon, the wisest of kings, during whose reign he had many rings, this the most important. But it is not known whether this ring was ever made by mortal hands. It is supposed that an angel gave it to wise King Solomon. Then the youth had a cunning idea. "I do not think it possible that the ring can have all the power you say it has," he said. "Do let me try to see if I can do these wonderful things." The maiden, suspecting no treachery, gave him the magic ring. The youth asked her to remind him what finger he would put it on so that he could fly, as he wanted to do the flying first. "Oh, the little finger of your left hand," the maiden answered, laughing. The youth did so, and he soared into the air just like a bird. When the maiden saw him flying away, she thought he was playing. But the young man just never came back. The young man never halted in his flight until he reached the dwelling of a wise magician who had taught him the language of the birds. The magician delightfully set to work at once to interpret the secret signs engraved upon the ring, but it took him 7 weeks to make them out clearly. Then he told the youth he must have an iron horse cast with little wheels under each foot, It must have huge iron chains and pegs made for it, and he must be armed with a spear. This spear must be as long and as thick as a tree, which he would be able to wield by means of the magic ring upon his left thumb. And he told the youth how to use these to defeat the dragon. The young man thanked the magician sincerely and quickly flew home through the air. After some weeks, he heard people saying that the terrible dragon of the north was not far off. The king announced publicly that he would give his daughter in marriage, as well as a large part of his kingdom, to whomever should free the country of this dragon. The youth went straight to the king, and everything was prepared as requested. The young man rode out upon the iron horse to meet the dragon, pushing the spear against the ground, as if he were pushing off a boat from the land. The dragon had his monstrous jaws wide open. The youth trembled with horror, and his blood ran cold. Yet he did not lose his courage, but, holding the iron spear upright in his hand, he brought it down with all his might right through the dragon's lower jaw. Then, quick as lightning, he sprang from his horse before the dragon had time to open his mouth. A fearful clap like thunder, which could be heard for miles around, now warned him that the dragon's jaws had closed upon the spear. When the youth turned round, he saw the point of the spear sticking up high above the dragon's upper jaw, and knew that the other end must be fastened firmly to the ground. But the dragon had got his teeth fixed in the iron horse, which was now useless. The youth now hastened to fasten down the chains to the ground. He did this by means of enormous giant pegs, which had been provided already in the ground. The dragon struggled, of course, and this struggle, called the death struggle, lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. In its writhing, it beat its tail so violently against the ground that at 10 miles away the earth trembled as if an earthquake. When at length lost power to move his tail, the youth, with the help of the ring, took up a stone that over 20 normal men could have never moved, and beat the dragon so hard about the head with each stone that very soon the dragon lay lifeless before him. You can fancy how great was the rejoicing when the news was spread, and it spread abroad and all over that the terrible dragon was dead, and his conqueror was absolutely received with so much celebration, as if he had been the mightiest of knights. The king's daughter was delighted to marry the hero, and a magnificent wedding was celebrated. But everyone forgot, amid the general joy, that they ought to have buried the dragon's monstrous body, for it began to have such a bad smell that the whole air was poisoned, which destroyed many hundreds of people. In this distress, the king's son-in-law resolved to work. He wanted to help at once, so he went to the Eastern magician, to whom he had travelled before, and he did this through the air in the form of a bird. However, the witch maiden had discovered by magic where the youth in her ring were. She changed herself into an eagle and watched in the air until the bird came in sight. Then she pounced upon him and tore the ring from the ribbon that he wore around his neck. Then the eagle flew down to the earth with her prey, and her two stood face to face once more in human form. She had two faces, that's what that means. Now, villain, you are in my power, and you must pay, said the witch maiden. One of the heads did. She put the ring upon her left thumb. She then picked up the young man with one hand and walked away with him into a deep cave. The maiden chained the young man's hands and feet to the rock so that he could not escape and he could not get away. He could not move at all, in fact. His arms were of no movement. She had tied him so tightly. Here you shall remain till you die. I will bring you enough food to prevent you from dying of hunger. But you need never hope for freedom. There will be none for you. And with these words, she simply left him. The old king and his daughter waited, and they waited anxiously for weeks and weeks, hoping the prince would soon return. But no news at all had arrived. They sent messengers far and wide to look for him. After searching for 7 long years, they, by luck, met with an old magician who had interpreted the signs on King Solomon's ring. The magician soon found out what they wished to know and went himself to the cave where the unfortunate prince was still chained up. The magician released him by the help of the powerful magic and took care of the prince until he became strong enough to travel. When he reached home, he found that the old king had died. So he was now going to be raised to the throne that he had married the daughter for. And now, after his long suffering came prosperity, which lasted to the end of his life. But he would never get back the magic ring, and it's never been found or seen again, not by mortal eyes anyway. The end. That's an interesting story because it reminds me of a couple of other stories, although this is different. It describes a dragon. It doesn't do that in some of the others, but it has changed because it's also got King Solomon's ring in it, and that's definitely not in the other stories. But like the storyline's sort of similar. Some of the wording's odd. In this book, it doesn't flow like normal stories would. It tends to peak off in odd places, but yeah. Anyway, guys, please hit the like because it really does help. Thank you for listening and many blessings.